Alright, so I've spent way too many hours digging through item descriptions, cut dialogue, and obscure NPC questlines for this one, and I think it's worth it. This video covers all 121 named NPCs in Elden Ring, ranked by how compelling their arcs are, and explained in full. One choice I made early on was to group certain NPCs by their faction or storyline, rather than going strictly by rank number to number, because some of these characters only make sense when you see them next to the people they're connected to. So the ranking is still there, but the structure follows the threads of the story first. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. Let's get into it. Chapter 1: The Lowest Ranked and the Forgotten Faces. Starting at the bottom of this list isn't meant as an insult to these characters. It's more about screen time and impact on the wider story. Some of these NPCs exist almost entirely as quest triggers or vendors, with very little dialogue to dig into. Take someone like the nomadic merchants scattered across the lands between. They're functional, they sell useful items, but they don't really have names, personalities, or arcs in the traditional sense. Still, their placement tells us something about the world. The fact that merchants can survive and operate in such a hostile, decaying land suggests that even amid collapse, some form of trade and economy persists. Then there are characters like the various spirit ashes that technically count as NPCs in terms of having unique dialogue or backstory snippets, even if players mostly interact with them as summons. Take the mimic tear, for instance. Its item description hints at a deeper connection to alchemy and tarnished history, suggesting it was created through some kind of forbidden experimentation. One possible reading is that the mimic tear represents a warning about hubris, about scholars pushing too far into replication and creation without considering consequences. It's a small detail, but it adds texture to the world. Moving further into this lower tier, we have NPCs whose only real function is to provide flavor text or react to player choices in minor ways. The various imps and lesser hostile NPCs that occasionally speak before attacking fall into this category. Their dialogue is often cryptic, fragmented, sometimes barely coherent, but if you piece it together across multiple encounters, you start to notice patterns. Many of them reference being lost, being hungry, or seeking something they can't quite articulate. This points toward a broader theme in Elden Ring, about characters losing their sense of self, becoming consumed by base instincts when their original purpose falls away. One NPC that often gets overlooked is the unnamed travelling merchant inside Stormvale Castle. He's tucked away, easy to miss, and offers only a brief interaction. But his presence inside a hostile fortress raises questions. How did he get there? Why is he allowed to operate within Godric's domain when so much of the castle is locked in violent conflict? One interpretation suggests that merchants in this world exist outside the typical hierarchies of power, almost as neutral parties tolerated even by warring factions, because everyone needs supplies. Similarly, the hooded tarnished found wandering certain areas serve as ambient storytelling devices. They don't have names, they don't have quests, but their wandering, lost behaviour reinforces the idea that countless tarnished have been called back to the lands between. Many of them aimless, many of them broken by the journey before they even begin it. This ties into the broader narrative about the tarnished as a collective, not just the player character, but an entire population of exiled warriors being summoned for unclear purposes. Moving up slightly, we reach NPCs like Boggart, the small thief found near Stormhill. Boggart's dialogue is brief but memorable, mostly because of his comedic tone amid such a grim world. He's framed as a petty criminal, someone scraping by through theft rather than combat or faith. His presence suggests that even in a land overrun by demigods and supernatural threats, ordinary crime and desperation still exist. Not everyone in the lands between is fighting for the Elden Ring itself, some are just trying to survive day to day. Another NPC worth mentioning here is the unnamed albinoric child found in certain hidden locations. While not extensively developed, these characters tie into the larger albinoric storyline involving Ranni and the Carian royal family. Their isolated, frightened presence suggests persecution, a population pushed to the margins, hiding from a world that views them as cursed or strange. This becomes more significant later when we explore Ranni's full arc, but even in isolation, these brief encounters with albinoric NPCs plant the seeds of that larger narrative. We also have to talk about the various invaders and hostile NPC phantoms that appear throughout the world. Characters like the Knight's Cavalry. These armoured riders patrol certain areas exclusively at night, and their item drops include references to ancient hunts and rituals tied to the moon. One interpretation is that the Knight's Cavalry represents remnants of an older order, knights bound to some forgotten duty that continues even after whatever they were protecting has been lost or destroyed. Their nocturnal nature ties them thematically to other moon-related storylines we'll explore later. The lower tier also includes characters like the various crystalline constructs and animated armour sets found guarding specific locations. While these don't speak or have personalities in the traditional sense, their placement and the items associated with them suggest they were created as guardians for specific treasures or secrets. The fact that they continue their duty long after their creators are gone reinforces a recurring theme in Elden Ring: the idea of purpose outliving purpose givers, of duty becoming hollow ritual. Rounding out this first chapter, we have characters like Gowry, the blind merchant found in Caelid. Gowry occupies a strange position. He's clearly knowledgeable, possibly even dangerous, given his connections to certain forbidden rituals later in the game. But on first encounter, he simply offers items and cryptic advice. His blindness in a region as visually horrifying as Caelid feels almost merciful. He doesn't have to see the scarlet rot up close. Yet his knowledge of the land's history suggests he's been here a long time, watching Caelid's decline through other senses, through smell, sound, and whispered information from travellers. Chapter 2: The Volcano Manor and its inhabitants. Now we move into a more cohesive group, the NPCs tied to Volcano Manor, one of the more morally ambiguous factions in the game. At the centre of this group is Tanith, the so-called Lady of the Manor, though she's quick to clarify she's merely a servant. Tanith's dialogue is calm, almost businesslike, even as she discusses assassination contracts on some of the most powerful figures in the lands between. This calmness suggests she's been doing this for a very long time, that the cycle of recruiting Tarnished to eliminate other tarnished or important figures is routine to her, almost mundane. Tanith's questline reveals her true allegiance toward the end, and her connection to the Volcano Manor's true purpose, protecting and serving Tanith herself, who is actually one of the Fingers, those mysterious beings tied to the Greater Will's communication with Tarnished. This recontextualizes everything about the manor. It's not just a den of assassins working for personal gain, it's potentially an instrument of the Greater Will, using Tarnished to eliminate other Tarnished who might pose threats to whatever plan is unfolding. Then we have Raya, found near the mountaintop of the Giants, before eventually appearing within Volcano Manor itself. Raya's questline is deeply tragic. She's been sent on a mission to retrieve an item from Selen, but the consequences of completing this task reveal the dark underbelly of how the manor treats its agents. Raya's arc suggests that loyalty within Volcano Manor is often one-directional. Agents are expendable, used and discarded once their purpose is fulfilled. This contrasts sharply with the manor's polished, hospitable exterior. Bernal, also known as the blade-adjacent wandering warrior found at the manor, serves as one of the more grounded NPCs in this group. His dialogue reveals disillusionment with the Volcano Manor's methods, particularly its treatment of the player character as just another tool. Bernal eventually leaves the manor, becoming an enemy if the player progresses certain other questlines, specifically related to Ranni's path. This creates an interesting dynamic. Bernal represents a moral conscience within an otherwise morally flexible organization, someone who recognizes when things have gone too far. The various assassination targets tied to Volcano Manor also deserve mention here, even if they're not technically members of the manor themselves. Figures like Rykard, the demigod who rules over the manor from below, in his true monstrous form. Rykard's transformation into a massive serpent represents one of the more grotesque examples of a demigod's descent into something inhuman. His dialogue, what little there is, suggests he sought power through consuming a god, specifically through the serpent hunter's intended target, attempting to gain godlike properties through literal consumption rather than the traditional paths of faith or conquest. This ties into broader themes about the demigod's varying responses to the shattering, the war that erupted after Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring. Some demigods, like Godric, became obsessed with restoring their former glory through any means necessary, including grafting body parts from defeated enemies onto themselves. Rykard took a different path, seeking to transcend his own form entirely by becoming something other than human or demigod, something serpentine and consuming. We also have to discuss the unnamed tarnished hunters found within Volcano Manor's depths, NPCs who exist solely to be encountered as targets during specific Tanith-assigned missions. While they don't have extensive personalities, their presence and dialogue, brief as it is, suggest that the world is full of tarnished pursuing their own agendas, many of whom never make it far before being eliminated by other tarnished working for organisations like Volcano Manor. Juno Hoslow, encountered as one of Tanith's targets, presents an interesting case. Hoslow appears as a knight pursuing his own quest related to retrieving Vike's Dragonbolt, suggesting he has connections to the dragon cult and possibly aspirations toward draconic communion himself. His confrontation with the player, as another tarnished sent to eliminate him, creates a moment of tragic irony. Two tarnished, both pursuing their own paths toward power or purpose, forced into conflict by a third party's machinations. The blackguard Big Boggart, found within Volcano Manor's grounds, serves as a darkly comedic NPC. He's essentially Boggart from earlier in the game, but now operating within a more sinister organisation. This recurring character across different locations suggests a kind of continuity for minor NPCs, that thieves and opportunists like Boggart don't simply disappear after their initial appearance. They continue their activities, sometimes finding employment with organisations that value their particular skill set. Finally, we should touch on the various invader phantoms that appear specifically within Volcano Manor's vicinity, NPCs that represent other tarnished who've been sent on similar assassination missions, but who've perhaps gone rogue or failed their assignments. Their hostile behaviour toward the player suggests a kind of paranoia or desperation. Tarnished who know they're being hunted, striking first against anyone who approaches, including fellow tarnished who might pose a threat. Chapter 3. The Round Table Hold and its Wandering Souls. The Round Table Hold serves as one of the central hubs in Elden Ring, and the NPCs found here represent a cross-section of different factions, beliefs, and motivations, all gathered in this strange, almost timeless space. At the heart of this hub is the Two Fingers and their finger reader, Enya, who performs the actual maiden rebirth ceremony. Enya's design and dialogue are sparse, almost ritualistic, suggesting she's less an individual with personal motivations and more a conduit for the greater will's processes. Brother Corin represents one of the more morally complex NPCs in this hub. As a scholar of the Golden Order's incantations, Corin's questline eventually intersects with Goldmask's pursuit of the Golden Order fundamentalist ending. Corin's journey suggests someone seeking redemption or purpose through faith, even as that faith leads him toward increasingly extreme interpretations of Golden Order doctrine. His relationship with Goldmask, someone who's lost his memory and identity entirely, creates a fascinating dynamic. A man of words guiding a man with no words of his own toward a goal neither fully understands the implications of. Goldmask himself deserves significant attention here. Found wandering aimlessly until his questline begins, Goldmask represents a demigod, specifically Marika's son, who's lost his identity entirely, his memories, his sense of self, even his name in the traditional sense, replaced by an obsession with achieving a perfect, balanced Elden Ring through mathematical and logical means rather than emotional or spiritual ones. This suggests an interpretation of Goldmask as someone who's transcended typical demigod motivations, no longer seeking power for its own sake, but seeking a kind of cosmic order through pure logic. Goldmask's connection to the Golden Order fundamentalist ending, achievable through his and Corin's combined efforts, paints a particular picture of what a Golden Order victory might look like, one stripped of compassion, pursued through unwavering doctrine and ritual. This ending suggests a return to rigid order, but one that might lack the flexibility or mercy that even Queen Marika's original Golden Order possessed. D, Hunter of the Dead, serves as one of the more enigmatic figures within the Round Table Hold. His questline involves hunting down Fia, the deathbed companion, due to her associations with the frenzied flame and her attempts to undermine the Erdtree's grip on death itself. Dee's dialogue suggests deep personal convictions about the natural order of life and death, viewing Fia's actions as a perversion of something sacred, even as Fia herself frames her actions as compassionate, offering peace to those who fear death's absence in this broken world. Dee's eventual death, killed by his own twin brother Fia recruits to take his place, creates one of the more tragic moments in the early game. This twin brother, who simply takes Dee's name and continues his role, suggests something unsettling about identity and duty in the lands between, that roles and titles can be passed between individuals almost seamlessly, that the function matters more than the person fulfilling it. Fia herself represents one of the more compassionate figures in the game, despite her associations with the frenzied flame. Her actions throughout her questline, embracing, dying tarnished, offering comfort to those who fear the Empyrean's curse of endless rebirth without true death, suggests someone who genuinely believes she's offering mercy. The fact that her path eventually intersects with the frenzied flame ending suggests that even compassionate intentions can lead toward catastrophic outcomes when the underlying problem, the broken nature of death itself in this world, remains unaddressed. We should also discuss the various blacksmiths found within the Round Table Hold, smithing master Hugh and the wandering blacksmith encountered earlier, e.g., Hugh's dialogue reveals he's been imprisoned for unspecified crimes, yet continues his craft within the hold. This suggests that even within this seemingly neutral space, politics and judgment from external factions still apply. Hugh's imprisonment implies someone or something with authority over the Round Table Hold's inhabitants, even if that authority remains largely unseen. Roderica, found initially as a despondent figure near the Stormhill Shack before relocating to the Round Table Hold, represents one of the more hopeful arcs among the Hold's NPCs. Her transformation from someone who's lost the will to continue into someone who finds new purpose through spirit tuning suggests that even in this broken world, people can find new paths forward, new ways of contributing, even after their original purpose, in her case as a warrior, becomes impossible to fulfill. Finally, the various unnamed tarnished found wandering or resting within the Round Table Hold serve as ambient reminders of the broader tarnished population. Some sit by fires, others wander aimlessly, their lack of dialogue suggesting they've given up on whatever purpose initially called them back to the lands between. The Round Table Hold, then, isn't just a hub for important questlines, it's also a kind of refuge, a place where lost, purposeless tarnished can simply exist without immediate threat, even if that existence lacks direction. Chapter 4: The Carrion Royal Family and Ranni's Allies. This chapter focuses on one of the most intricate questlines in Elden Ring, centered around Ranni the Witch and her allies, the Carrion Royal Family, and the broader implications of Ranni's plan for the Age of Stars. Ranni herself represents one of the most compelling characters in the game, a demigod who actively rejects her role within the Golden Order's framework, instead pursuing an alternative path that involves severing herself from her physical body and embracing the cosmic, indifferent nature of the stars themselves. Ranni's backstory, pieced together through item descriptions and dialogue, suggests she was meant to become the next vessel for the Elden Ring's power following Queen Marika's shattering, but instead orchestrated her own death, or rather, the death of her original body, the Empyrean known as Ranni, in order to escape this fate. This suggests someone willing to sacrifice everything, including her physical existence, in pursuit of a vision she believes represents true freedom from the cycles imposed by the Greater Will and the Golden Order. Iji, the giant blacksmith found at the witch hunter's Lindy's location near the Three Sisters, serves as one of Ranni's most loyal companions. Iji's dialogue reveals deep affection and protectiveness toward Ranni, having served her since her childhood. This suggests Ranni's plan isn't purely a solo endeavour. She's cultivated genuine relationships, earned loyalty through more than just command or coercion. Saluvis, the disturbing sorcerer found near the same location, presents a stark contrast to Iji's straightforward loyalty. Saluvis's questline reveals deeply unsettling practices, specifically his creation of puppet brides through manipulation and deception of NPCs like the dancer found within Carrier Manor. Saluvis's loyalty to Ranni seems less about genuine affection and more about ambition, hoping that serving Ranni's cause will elevate his own standing or grant him access to forbidden knowledge. The player's interaction with Saluvis's questline often involves a choice: deliver poison to him on Ranni's behalf, effectively eliminating him, or refuse and potentially face consequences. This choice highlights the morally grey nature of Ranni's allies. Even within her inner circle, not everyone shares her vision for benevolent reasons, and she's willing to eliminate those whose methods or ambitions become liabilities. Bled, the wolfman found wandering the Mistwood early in the game, represents another of Ranni's loyal companions, tasked with hunting down Starscourge Radahn as part of Ranni's broader plan. Bled's transformation throughout his questline, from a somewhat straightforward warrior figure into someone increasingly consumed by his hunt, mirroring the madness that's overtaken Radahn himself, suggests that proximity to Radahn's curse, the result of his battle with Melina spreading scarlet rot, has lasting effects even on those merely sent to confront him. Sorceress Selen, found within Waypoint Ruins, represents one of the more tragic figures connected to this broader storyline, though her connection to Ranni is more indirect, tied instead to the broader conflict of sorcery academies and the schism that occurred at the Academy of Raya Lucaria. Selen's questline involves her former student turned rival, Azur, and reveals deep ideological conflicts about the nature and limits of sorcery, specifically regarding primeval current sorceries that draw from before the Golden Order's establishment. Selen's eventual fate, whether she achieves her goal of understanding these primeval sorceries, or whether her quest leads to her destruction, depending on player choices, suggests someone whose pursuit of knowledge has become all-consuming, to the point where her physical form becomes almost irrelevant compared to the knowledge she seeks to attain or preserve. The Carrion royal family more broadly, represented through environmental storytelling within Carrier Manor and the broader Liurnia region, suggests a once prosperous sorcery-focused kingdom that's fallen into decline following internal conflicts and the broader shattering. The various Carrion knights found defending remnants of this kingdom, even in its diminished state, suggest a deep-seated loyalty to Carrion traditions, even among those who might not fully understand or agree with Ranni's current goals. Finally, we have to discuss Ranni, Ranni's original Empyrean form, encountered briefly through flashback-style environmental storytelling and item descriptions. Ranni represents who Ranni was before her transformation, suggesting that Ranni's current form, the small doll-like body she inhabits along with the Dark Moon Ring, represents a deliberate choice to abandon her original Empyrean destiny entirely. This choice, more than any single piece of dialogue, defines Ranni's entire character, a willingness to fundamentally alter her own existence in pursuit of independence from predetermined cosmic roles. Chapter 5: The Dung Eater and the Omen Storyline. This chapter explores one of the more disturbing and morally complex storylines in Elden Ring, centered around the Dung Eater and the broader narrative of the Omens, beings born with horn-like growths who are persecuted and often discarded due to superstitions about their connection to dark fate. The Dung Eater himself, found imprisoned within Limgrave's tunnel, presents one of the most uncomfortable NPC interactions in the game, his dialogue filled with disturbing implications about his past crimes and his current goals. The Dung Eater's questline involves collecting seedbed curses from various locations throughout the world, each one associated with sites of significant suffering or death. This collection process itself tells a story. The seedbed curses represent concentrated suffering, and their locations, places like Stormvale Castle's torture grounds or sites of mass death, suggest the Dung Eater's plan involves weaponizing this accumulated suffering for some broader purpose. The Dung Eater's ultimate goal, revealed through his questline's completion, involves using these curses to afflict the tarnished player character with the eternal sleep, effectively removing them from the cycle of death and rebirth that defines tarnished existence. The Dung Eater frames this as liberation, freedom from an endless cycle of dying and returning, though the method, involving what amounts to eternal imprisonment within one's own corpse, suggests this liberation comes at a horrifying cost. This storyline connects to the broader Omen narrative through the Dung Eater's own nature, implied to be an Omen himself, someone who's experienced the persecution and discarding that Omens typically face. His twisted philosophy that suffering and degradation represent some form of truth or purity seems to stem from this personal history of persecution, suggesting someone who's internalized society's cruelty toward him and transformed it into an ideology. Morgott, the Omen King found as the primary obstacle within Lendel, represents perhaps the most significant Omen character in the game. Morgott's dialogue and the environmental storytelling surrounding him reveal a figure who's risen to a position of significant power despite, or perhaps because of, his Omen status. Morgott's defense of Lendel, even as the city crumbles around him, suggests deep loyalty to the Erdtree and the Golden Order, perhaps stemming from gratitude for being allowed a position of authority despite the typical treatment Omens receive. Morgott's twin brother, Mog, presents a contrasting response to similar circumstances. Where Morgott embraced his role within the Golden Order's hierarchy, Mog rejected it entirely, instead pursuing his own ambitions related to the Formless Mother and his goal of becoming a Lord of Blood. Mog's questline involving the kidnapping of Miquella suggests someone who's found his own form of power and purpose outside traditional Golden Order structures, even if that power comes through embracing the very darkness and blood-related themes that society typically associates with Omens. The various unnamed Omens found imprisoned or hidden throughout the world, particularly within the subterranean shunning grounds beneath Lendel, provide environmental context for this storyline. These areas, filled with imprisoned, often hostile Omens, suggest a systematic practice of discarding individuals deemed unworthy or dangerous due to their physical traits, regardless of their actual character or capabilities. This systematic discarding connects to broader themes about the Golden Order's treatment of those who don't fit its idealized vision of order and purity. The Omens, born with what's considered an unfortunate physical trait, become scapegoats, blamed for various calamities or simply hidden away to maintain the Golden Order's aesthetic of perfection, even as this practice creates the very resentment and rebellion embodied by figures like Mog and the Dung Eater that threatens the Order's stability. Millicent, found at the Church of Vows before embarking on her own questline related to the rock goddess Melina, presents another angle on themes of bodily corruption and identity. While not technically an Omen, Millicent's affliction with scarlet rot and her status as one of Melina's sisters. Beings created through Melina's own flesh ties into similar themes about bodies that don't conform to societal expectations of health or purity, and the various responses, acceptance, rejection, or attempted cures that such individuals face. Millicent's questline ultimately offers the player a choice. Help her accept her rot-afflicted nature and find peace with it, or attempt to cure her through Miquella's needle, which would fundamentally alter who she is. This choice mirrors broader themes throughout the Omen storyline. Questions about whether physical imperfections should be cured, hidden, or simply accepted as part of someone's identity, with no easy answers provided by the narrative itself. Chapter 6. The Demigods of the Shattering. The demigods represent the children of Queen Marika and Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, each of whom received a piece of the shattered Elden Ring following Marika's act of shattering it herself. This chapter examines the major demigods not yet covered, exploring how each responded differently to receiving their fragment of power, and what these responses suggest about the broader shattering conflict. Godric the Grafted, encountered relatively early as the boss of Stormveil Castle, represents perhaps the most visually disturbing example of a demigod's response to the shattering. Godric's practice of grafting limbs from defeated enemies, including dragon parts, onto his own body suggests someone desperately trying to compensate for what he perceives as inadequacy. His full title, The Grafted, and his obsession with grafting suggest he received what he considers an insufficient portion of the Elden Ring's power compared to his siblings, driving him toward increasingly extreme measures to bolster his own strength and standing. Godric's dialogue during his boss encounter reveals desperation beneath his bravado, references to restoring the glory of his bloodline, to becoming Godric the Grafted, Lord of Stormveil, in a way that suggests he's compensating for insecurity about his place within the demigod hierarchy. This insecurity likely stems from his position as a relatively minor demigod compared to figures like Radahn or Melina, driving his desperate attempts to enhance himself through grafting. Ranni, Queen of the Full Moon, found within the Academy of Raya Lucaria, represents a demigod whose response to the shattering involves retreat into grief and madness rather than aggressive expansion or grafting. Ranni's questline, involving breaking her great rune through a battle that more resembles dispelling an illusion than traditional combat, reveals someone trapped in mourning for her lost children, specifically Ranni, whom she perceives as having died, not realizing Ranni's transformation was deliberate. Ranni's connection to the Academy of Raya Lucaria and the broader sorcery traditions of Liurnia suggests her domain focuses on knowledge and magic rather than military conquest, distinguishing her approach to the shattering from more militant demigods. Her eventual defeat by the player, which involves dispelling illusions to reach her true grieving form, suggests that her power, her great rune, is intrinsically tied to this state of magical illusion and denial. Breaking free from grief in this interpretation might require breaking the very magic that sustains her current existence. Starscourge Radahn, encountered at the Caelid battlefield surrounded by the devastating effects of scarlet rot from his battle with Melina, represents one of the most tragic demigod figures. Once renowned as a brilliant general and warrior, Radahn's current state, consumed by madness from the rot infection, his body grotesquely altered, his mind seemingly lost to memories of past glory, suggests someone whose great rune and power couldn't protect him from the consequences of conflict with another demigod possessing similarly immense power. Radahn's Festival, the in-game event that occurs before his boss fight, where various NPCs gather to essentially provide a final celebration before facing him, suggests something almost ritualistic about confronting Radahn. An acknowledgement that what's being fought isn't really Radahn the person anymore, but rather the remnants of his power and the rot that's consumed him, requiring a community effort to overcome. Melina, Blade of Miquella, found at the heart of the scarlet rot source within Caelid, represents perhaps the most narratively significant demigod due to her connection to both Radahn's current state and her twin brother Miquella's broader storyline. Melinia's affliction with scarlet rot, framed not as a curse, but as her own power, Melina, goddess of rot, suggests someone who's embraced what others might consider a curse, as an extension of her own identity and strength. Melina's battle with Radahn, referenced throughout Caelid's devastated landscape, represents a pivotal moment in the broader, shattering conflict. Two of the most powerful demigods clashing, with consequences, the spread of scarlet rot across an entire region that continued to affect the world long after the battle itself concluded. This suggests that demigod conflicts during the Shattering weren't just political struggles, but had catastrophic environmental and societal consequences that reshaped entire regions. Miquella, Melina's twin brother, presents one of the more complex demigod narratives, partly because Miquella himself remains largely unseen until very specific points in the game, having put himself into an eternal slumber in an attempt to escape what he perceives as the corrupting influence of the Golden Order's compassion taken to its extreme. Miquella's connection to figures like Mog, who's holding Miquella's slumbering form, and the broader implications of Miquella's eventual fate, depending on DLC content and various questline completions, suggests someone whose response to the Shattering involves a complete withdrawal from active participation, choosing stasis over engagement with the ongoing conflicts. The various unnamed remnant soldiers and knights found defending different demigod territories throughout the game. The soldiers of Stormvale, the knights of Lendal, the various forces still loyal to specific demigod causes even after their leaders' deaths or transformations, suggest that the Shattering wasn't just a conflict between individual demigods, but involved entire armies and populations, each loyal to their respective demigod's vision, creating a fractured world where regional identities and loyalties remain tied to figures who may no longer even be recognizable as their former selves. Chapter 7: Lendal's Inhabitants and the Erdtree's Heart. Lendal, the royal capital, serves as the symbolic and literal heart of the Golden Order, and the NPCs found within and around this city reflect the complex relationship between faith, power, and decay that defines the broader narrative. This chapter explores the various figures connected to Lendal, examining how proximity to the Erdtree itself shapes their beliefs and actions. Melina, the enigmatic companion who travels with the player throughout much of the game, represents one of the most significant NPCs overall, though her connection to Lendal specifically becomes clearer as the game progresses. Melina's true nature, revealed gradually, suggests she's connected to the Erdtree in a fundamental way, potentially as a being created specifically to guide Tarnish toward the Erdtree, possibly even serving as fuel for it, depending on certain interpretations of her ultimate fate. Melina's relationship with the player character, providing guidance, enabling level progression through memories of grace, and her eventual confrontation with what she calls her fate near the end of the game, suggests someone who's been shaped by forces beyond her control. The greater will, the Erdtree itself, to fulfill a specific role, even as she occasionally expresses doubt or sorrow about this predetermined path. The various Erdtree-aligned NPCs found throughout Lendal, particularly the soldiers and knights still defending the city even as it crumbles and burns, suggest deep institutional loyalty that persists even when the institution itself, the Golden Order, the Erdtree's authority, has clearly failed to maintain order or prevent the Shattering's devastating consequences. This persistence of loyalty, despite evident failure, mirrors broader themes about faith and institutional power throughout the game. Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, found within the Round Table Hold before his eventual confrontation as a boss, represents one of the more intellectually curious NPCs, someone who spent considerable effort gathering knowledge about the lands between's various mysteries, the frenzied flame, the formless mother, various demigod fates, seemingly for the sake of knowledge itself rather than any specific agenda. Gideon's eventual betrayal, attempting to seize the various great runes the player has collected for himself, suggests that even pure intellectual curiosity can become corrupted by proximity to genuine power, that knowledge about power isn't the same as wisdom about how to use or avoid using that power responsibly. Gideon's confrontation, occurring specifically when the player approaches the Erdtree itself, suggests his betrayal stems from a final, perhaps desperate, attempt to claim some portion of the power he spent so long studying from a distance. The Erdtree avatars, found guarding various locations throughout Lendel and beyond, represent another category of Erdtree-connected beings, less individual NPCs and more manifestations of the Erdtree's protective, almost antibody-like response to perceived threats. Their consistent hostility toward the player, regardless of the player's actual intentions, suggests the Erdtree itself, or whatever consciousness it possesses, views all tarnished with inherent suspicion, perhaps recognizing them as agents of change in a system that's become rigidly resistant to any change at all. The various land octopi and other strange, almost otherworldly creatures found within Lendel's sewers and hidden areas suggest something about what exists beneath the Golden Order's polished surface. Creatures that don't fit neatly into the Golden Order's categorization of beings, existing in forgotten spaces, suggesting the Erdtree's domain contains things even the Golden Order itself doesn't fully understand or acknowledge. Queen Marika herself, while not encountered as a traditional NPC, with dialogue in the same sense as other characters, represents the central figure whose actions, shattering the Elden Ring, set the entire game's events in motion. Marika's apparent dual nature, also existing as Radagon, suggests someone whose identity itself became fractured, perhaps even before the Elden Ring's physical shattering, hinting that the shattering of the ring might have been preceded by, or connected to, some kind of fracturing within Marika's own being. The implications of Marika's shattering, an act that created the demigods' great runes, that plunged the lands between into the shattering war, suggests someone who either deliberately chose chaos over whatever stable but perhaps stagnant order existed before, or someone whose own internal fracturing made such an act inevitable, the external shattering reflecting an internal one that had already occurred. Finally, we should discuss the various spirits and remnants found within the deepest parts of Lendel, beings that exist as echoes of the city's former inhabitants, going about routines and activities that suggest life as it once was, before the shattering, before the decay. These spectral remnants provide a haunting contrast to the current state of Lendel, suggesting a city that was once vibrant, populated, functional, now reduced to echoes performing the same activities eternally, unaware or unable to acknowledge that everything around them has changed. Chapter 8. The final reckoning top-ranked NPCs and their legacies. This final chapter brings together the highest-ranked NPCs based on the depth of their storylines, their impact on the broader narrative, and the questions their arcs raise about the nature of the lands between itself. These are the characters whose stories resonate most strongly, whose choices and fates encapsulate the broader themes explored throughout this video. At the very top of this ranking sits Ranni, whose questline we've already explored in detail, but whose overall impact on the narrative deserves reiteration here. Ranni's rejection of her predetermined role, her willingness to sacrifice her physical form, her cultivation of genuine loyalty among her allies, all of this combines to create perhaps the most complete character arc in the game. Someone who starts with a clear goal and pursues it with remarkable consistency, even as the methods required to achieve that goal raise uncomfortable questions about sacrifice and the cost of true independence. Close behind Ranni, we find Fia and her questline's exploration of death, mercy, and the consequences of trying to fix a broken system through compassion alone. Fia's story resonates because it doesn't offer easy answers. Her intentions seem genuinely good, yet her path connects to outcomes, the frenzied flame ending, that suggest even good intentions can contribute to catastrophic results when the underlying problems remain fundamentally unaddressed. Goldmask and Brother Corin's combined storyline ranks highly due to the unique perspective it offers on what a successful Golden Order ending might actually look like, one achieved through logic and ritual rather than compassion or genuine understanding, raising questions about whether such an ending truly represents victory or simply a different, perhaps colder, form of the same rigid order that contributed to the Shattering's devastating consequences in the first place. Millicent's questline ranks highly for its nuanced exploration of bodily autonomy and acceptance, offering players a genuine choice between curing an affliction or helping someone find peace with who they've become, regardless of whether that aligns with broader societal expectations of health or normalcy. This questline's lack of a clearly correct choice makes it particularly memorable, forcing players to consider their own values regarding identity and acceptance. Blade's transformation throughout his hunt for Radahn ranks highly due to the way it visually and narratively demonstrates the corrupting influence of prolonged exposure to Scarlet Rot and Radahn's madness, even on someone who starts the game seeming relatively stable and purposeful. Blade's eventual fate, becoming hostile if certain other questlines progress, serves as a stark reminder that even loyal, dedicated individuals can be consumed by the very threats they're sent to confront. Mog's storyline, while shorter than some others, ranks highly due to its connections to multiple other narratives. The Omen persecution storyline, Miquella's fate, the broader implications of the Formless Mother as an entity operating outside traditional Golden Order structures. Mog represents someone who's carved out genuine power for himself through rejection of societal norms, even if that power comes through embracing themes, blood, sacrifice, that most of society finds abhorrent. Sorceress Selen's questline ranks highly for its exploration of academic rivalry taken to extreme conclusions, and its connections to the broader history of sorcery within the lands between, particularly regarding primeval current sorceries that predate the Golden Order itself, suggesting forms of magic and belief that existed before the current dominant religious framework, hinting at a deeper, more complex history than the Golden Order's narrative typically acknowledges. Melina's overall arc, while perhaps less of a traditional questline and more of an ever-present companion narrative, ranks highly due to her centrality to the player's entire journey, and the questions her ultimate fate raises about free will, predetermined roles, and whether genuine choice exists for beings created or shaped specifically to fulfill particular functions within larger cosmic systems. The Dung Eater's storyline, despite, or perhaps because of, its disturbing content, ranks highly for the way it forces players to confront uncomfortable truths about persecution, resentment, and how societal cruelty can create individuals whose responses to that cruelty become equally cruel, creating cycles of suffering that perpetuate themselves across generations, with no clear point where this cycle could have been broken without addressing the systemic issues that created it in the first place. And finally, at the absolute pinnacle of this ranking, we return to the broader implications of all these intertwined storylines, suggesting that Elden Ring's true achievement isn't any single character's arc, but rather the way these arcs interconnect, reflect, and comment on each other, creating a tapestry where themes of identity, faith, persecution, sacrifice, and the search for purpose echo across dozens of individual stories, each illuminating different facets of a world grappling with the consequences of a shattered order, and the countless individuals, demigods and commoners alike, trying to find their place within, or sometimes deliberately outside, whatever new order might eventually emerge from that shattering. Chapter 9. The Haligtree and Melinia's domain, the Haligtree, represents one of the most physically distant and narratively isolated locations in Elden Ring, and the NPCs connected to it carry that sense of isolation in their dialogue and demeanour. At the centre of this chapter is Latenna the Albinauric, found initially as a withered, inert form near the mountaintop of the Giants before the player carries her toward Ordina, liturgical town. Latenna's questline involves restoring her to a more functional state so she can travel to the Haligtree herself, and her dialogue throughout suggests someone driven by a singular purpose, to reach a place that's become almost mythical even to her, despite her connection to it through her Albinauric heritage. Latena's reliance on the player to physically transport her, and her later request for assistance navigating the Haligtree's defences, suggests someone who spent a long time in a weakened, perhaps dormant state, only now attempting to fulfill whatever obligation or desire draws her toward this sacred site. Her Albinauric nature ties her into the broader persecution narrative explored earlier, but unlike the hidden, frightened Albinauric children encountered elsewhere, Latena represents an adult Albinauric with clear agency and purpose, even if that purpose remains somewhat opaque to the player throughout most of her questline. Gowry, the blind merchant first encountered in Caelid, returns to relevance here through his connection to the Haligtree's rituals and his eventual involvement in a particularly dark optional storyline involving Millicent. Gowry's knowledge extends beyond simple merchant transactions. He possesses understanding of rituals tied to the Haligtree and the broader implications of scarlet rot as something that can be cultivated or directed rather than simply endured or cured. His blindness, mentioned earlier as almost merciful given Caelid's horrors, takes on additional meaning here, suggesting someone who perceives the world through means other than sight, perhaps making him more attuned to the spiritual or ritualistic aspects of rot than someone relying purely on visual observation. The Clean Rot Knights, found defending the Haligtree's approaches, represent one of the more visually striking enemy factions in the game. Their golden, almost ethereal armour contrasting sharply with the rot-infested environment they protect. These knights, while not individually named or possessing extensive dialogue, suggest through their appearance and unwavering defence of the Haligtree a kind of purity maintained despite, or perhaps through, their proximity to rot, hinting that within Melina's domain, rot itself has been reframed not as corruption, but as a different kind of sacred state, one these knights have apparently embraced rather than feared. This reframing connects directly to Melina's own self-identification as goddess of rot, rather than someone afflicted by rot as a curse. The Clean Rot Knights, by extension, might represent followers who've similarly come to view rot not as something to be cured or hidden, but as an integral part of the Haligtree's current identity, a transformation from what the Haligtree once represented, likely connected to healing and life given its connection to figures like Miquella, into something that's incorporated decay and rot as part of a new, different kind of sanctity. The broader history of the Haligtree, pieced together through environmental details and item descriptions, suggests it once served a very different purpose than its current rot-soaked state might indicate. References connecting the Haligtree to Miquella, to healing, to the concept of a Haligtree as something meant to provide unconditional aid, suggest an original purpose centred on compassion and restoration. The current state, infested with scarlet rot following Melina's battle with Radahn, represents this original purpose corrupted, or perhaps transformed, by the consequences of that devastating conflict. Melina's sisters, beings created through some connection to Melina's own flesh or essence, extend beyond Millicent to include other figures found scattered throughout the world, though many of these connections remain implicit rather than explicitly stated. The various scarlet rot-afflicted NPCs encountered in different locations, even those without extensive questlines, might represent these sisters in some form, suggesting Melina's influence, or perhaps her affliction, extends far beyond her immediate physical presence in Caelid, spreading through some kind of spiritual or magical connection to other beings created from or connected to her essence. This concept of sisters created from a single source ties into broader themes about identity and individuality within Elden Ring's lore. If multiple beings exist as extensions or copies of Melina's essence, each potentially developing their own personality, desires, and fates, as Millicent clearly does through her own questline, this raises questions about what defines individual identity when origin points can be shared. Are Melina's sisters truly individuals, or extensions of Melina herself, experiencing existence through multiple simultaneous perspectives. The broader Albinauric persecution narrative, touched upon earlier through hidden Albinauric children, connects more directly to the Haligtree and Carrier Manor's history through this region's environmental storytelling. References to Albinaurics being hunted, their connection to the moon, and to figures like Ranni, who herself has Albinauric associations through her current small body, suggest a population that's faced systematic persecution likely connected to their perceived otherness. Their pale appearance, their connections to lunar rather than solar, Erdtree-aligned cosmic forces. This persecution narrative gains additional weight when considered alongside the Haligtree's current isolated, defended state. If Albinaurics face persecution from Golden Order-aligned forces, the Haligtree's remote location, its formidable defences, including the Cleanrot Knights, might represent not just protection against rot-related dangers, but also protection for an Albinauric population seeking refuge from broader societal persecution. The Haligtree serving as a kind of sanctuary for beings, Albinauric and otherwise, who don't fit within the Golden Order's preferred categories of acceptable existence. The connection between Carrier Manor's history and the Haligtree becomes clearer when considering Ranni's own Albinauric-adjacent nature and her family's broader history. If the Carrion royal family has historical connections to Albinauric populations, perhaps through intermarriage or shared ancestry given Liurnia's proximity to regions associated with Albinauric communities, this might explain both Ranni's current form, an Albinauric-styled doll body, and the broader persecution that's affected both Albinauric specifically and the Carrion royal families standing within the Golden Order's hierarchy more generally. Finally, the path toward the Haligtree itself, traversed through Ordina, liturgical town, presents one of the more unique navigational challenges in the game, requiring the player to avoid detection by spectral, hostile figures, while progressing through what appears to be a kind of liminal, ritual space. This area's design, combined with Latenna's questline requiring her presence to access certain areas, suggests Ordina serves as a kind of threshold or gateway, a place that exists between the normal world and the Haligtree's more sacred, isolated domain, requiring specific conditions or guides, like Latenna, to pass through safely, reinforcing the Haligtree's status as a place set apart from the rest of the lands between, both physically and spiritually. Chapter 10. Liurnia's Sorcery Academies and Raya Lucaria. The Academy of Raya Lucaria and the broader sorcery traditions of Liurnia represent one of the more intellectually focused storylines in Elden Ring, centered on questions of knowledge, its limits, and the consequences of pursuing understanding without restraint. This chapter explores the academic rivalries, historical schisms, and individual pursuits of knowledge that define this region's NPC population. Azur, found in a meditative state near the mountaintops of the Giants, alongside his former rival Lusat, represents one half of a significant academic schism within Raya Lucaria's history. Azur's current state, seemingly frozen in deep contemplation, surrounded by the effects of powerful sorcery, suggests someone who's pursued magical understanding to such an extreme degree that he's become almost separated from normal existence, his body remaining in this location, while his consciousness, presumably, continues some kind of magical exploration or meditation that's lasted for an extended, perhaps indefinite, period. Lusat, found in a similar state nearby, but surrounded by different magical effects, represents the other half of this schism, and the contrast between Azur and Lusat's current conditions, one seemingly connected to gravitational or spatial magic, the other to more chaotic, possibly destructive magical energies, suggests their original disagreement, whatever its specific nature. Involved fundamentally different approaches to, or philosophies about sorcery itself, approaches significant enough that even now, in their current frozen states, the different magical natures of their respective pursuits remain visually distinct. Sorceress Selen's connection to this broader schism becomes clearer through her own dialogue and questline, which reveals she was Azur's student before their relationship soured, leading to her current situation, trapped within Waypoint ruins, pursuing primeval current sorceries that exist outside or before the Golden Order's typical magical framework. Selen's pursuit of these primeval sorceries suggests someone seeking to understand magic in its more original or pure form, perhaps believing that current Golden Order sanctioned sorcery represents a limited or compromised version of magic's true potential. The primeval current itself, referenced through Selen's questline and various item descriptions, suggests a form of magic that predates the current dominant magical traditions, possibly connected to forces or beings that existed before the Golden Order's establishment, or perhaps connected to entirely different cosmic forces than those the Golden Order typically acknowledges. This concept of older or more fundamental magic existing alongside or beneath current magical traditions mirrors broader themes throughout Elden Ring about hidden histories and forces that the dominant religious and political structures either don't fully understand or actively suppress. Thops, encountered relatively early in the game near the Church of Ella before his eventual death, if his questline progresses naturally, represents a more minor figure within this broader academic context. But his connection to Selen, he's one of her supporters or students, despite her current exiled status, suggests the schism between Selen and Azur created lasting divisions, with some former Academy members maintaining loyalty to Selen despite, or perhaps because of, her unconventional path. Thops' eventual fate, whether he survives or dies depending on how the player handles Selen's questline, and the related conflict with another former Selen supporter who turns hostile, suggests these academic loyalties carry real consequences, that taking sides in what might initially seem like a purely intellectual dispute can result in actual violence and death among those who've aligned themselves with one perspective or another. The Carrion Knights, found defending various locations throughout Liurnia, particularly around Carrier Manor and the Three Sisters area, represent the more traditional, established magical tradition that Selen's pursuit of primeval sorceries implicitly challenges. These knights, maintaining their defensive positions even as the broader Carrion royal family's influence has clearly diminished, suggest an institution clinging to relevance and tradition even as the world around it changes, with figures like Ranni pursuing entirely different paths than what these knights presumably exist to protect or serve. The Academy's internal schism, then, can be understood as a microcosm of broader tensions throughout the lands between. Established traditions and institutions, represented by the Carrion Knights and the Academy's mainstream sorcery traditions, versus individuals pursuing alternative paths, whether that's Selen's primeval current sorceries, Ranni's rejection of her Empyrean destiny, or Azur and Lusart's apparently extreme, isolating pursuits of magical understanding that have removed them from normal society entirely. Preceptor Saluvis's full backstory, touched upon earlier in connection to Ranni's questline, gains additional context when considered alongside this broader academic environment. If Saluvis represents someone whose ambitions weren't satisfied through traditional academy paths, leading him toward Ranni's service and his disturbing puppet creation practices, this suggests the Academy's traditional structures might not accommodate all forms of ambition or magical interest, pushing those whose interests fall outside acceptable boundaries, whether that's Selen's primeval sorceries or Saluvis's puppet creations, toward alternative patrons or pursuits, some more ethically sound than others. This pattern, individuals with magical talent or ambition finding themselves at odds with traditional academy structures, then pursuing alternative paths with varying degrees of ethical consideration. Selen's pursuit of forbidden knowledge versus Saluvis's manipulation and deception of others for personal gain suggests the Academy's rigid structures might inadvertently create the very rogue sorcerers it presumably exists to prevent. Individuals whose talents, unable to find appropriate outlets within traditional structures, instead manifest in increasingly unconventional, sometimes harmful ways. The various student and scholar NPCs found wandering Liurnia's ruins often hostile, sometimes still casting basic sorceries even in their degraded states, provide additional environmental context for this broader academic decline. These figures, presumably once students or junior scholars within Raya Lucaria's traditional structure, now reduced to wandering, often mindless husks still performing fragments of their former magical training, suggest the Academy's decline wasn't just political or ideological, but involved an actual collapse that's left former students lost, perhaps driven mad by whatever events led to this decline, retaining only muscle memory fragments of their former knowledge and capabilities. Finally, the broader implications of this academic storyline connect to larger questions about knowledge and its proper limits that recur throughout Elden Ring's narrative. Whether it's Selen's pursuit of primeval sorceries, Azur and Lusart's apparently extreme magical explorations that have left them in suspended states, or the various failed students wandering Liurnia's ruins. This region's NPCs collectively suggest a cautionary perspective on unrestrained pursuit of magical knowledge, that such pursuits, even when motivated by genuine intellectual curiosity rather than malicious intent, can lead to isolation, madness, or worse, raising questions about whether the Academy's traditional restrictions, frustrating as they might be to ambitious students, perhaps served a protective function that's been lost as the Academy's authority has diminished. Chapter 11. The Mausoleum Knights, Deathbirds, and Death itself. This chapter explores one of the more abstract but thematically central storylines in Elden Ring, centered on the concept of death itself as a rune that's been removed from the Elden Ring, and the various NPCs and entities connected to this removal and its consequences for the broader world. The Gravesite Plain, a relatively late-game area, serves as the primary location connected to this storyline, and its environmental design, vast, open, filled with the remains of an enormous battle, immediately suggests something significant occurred here, connected to whatever conflict resulted in Death's rune being separated from the broader Elden Ring. The sheer scale of devastation visible throughout this area suggests this wasn't a minor skirmish, but rather a conflict of immense significance, likely involving forces far beyond typical demigod-level conflicts. The Black Blade wielded by Maliketh, encountered as a boss within this region, connects directly to this Death Rune storyline. Maliketh's role, seemingly as some kind of guardian or keeper related to destined death, suggests someone tasked with maintaining whatever current state death exists in following its removal from the Elden Ring. A state that's left the lands between populated by beings, including Tarnished, who don't experience death in its true or complete form, instead returning to life repeatedly, denied whatever finality death might otherwise provide. This connects directly to Fia's questline, explored earlier, and her belief that offering comfort to those who fear this endless cycle of return without true death represents a form of mercy. If Death's rune has been removed, creating this current situation where true death doesn't exist for beings like Tarnished, Fia's actions can be understood as an attempt to provide, on an individual level, what's been removed on a cosmic level, a genuine, final ending for those who desire it. The Beast Clergyman, encountered as part of Maliketh's boss encounter, represents another facet of this death-related storyline, though its specific significance remains somewhat ambiguous. The transformation between the Beast Clergyman and Maliketh during their boss encounter suggests some kind of connection, or perhaps even identity between these seemingly different entities, hinting that whatever maintains the current state of destined death might itself be something unstable, capable of shifting between different forms or aspects. The various Deathbird encounters scattered throughout the world, optional boss-like creatures that appear in specific locations, often guarding valuable items, serve as more environmental storytelling through gameplay elements connected to this broader death theme. These Deathbirds, with their unsettling, almost ritualistic appearances and the eerie atmosphere surrounding their encounters, suggest entities connected to death in some fundamental way, perhaps serving as a kind of psychopomp or death herald function within the world's broader cosmology. Even if their specific role within the Death Rune narrative isn't explicitly stated. The concept of destined death itself, referenced through various item descriptions and dialogue throughout the game, suggests something distinct from simply death as commonly understood. If destined death represents a specific cosmic force or concept removed from the Elden Ring and now existing in some altered, perhaps weakened or contained, state, this raises questions about what normal death, as experienced by non-tarnished beings, actually represents in this altered cosmological framework. Do ordinary beings still experience some form of death, just not the complete or destined version that's been removed? This question connects to broader observations made earlier about the various spectral remnants and echoes found throughout the world, beings that seem to exist in some state between life and death, performing routines eternally without acknowledgement of their changed circumstances. If destined death's removal has created a world where even non-tarnished beings don't experience proper finality, this might explain why so many locations throughout the lands between are populated by these echo-like entities, neither fully alive nor properly dead, simply continuing existence in some diminished, repetitive form. The connection between this Deathrune storyline and the broader Shattering conflict becomes clearer when considering the timing implied by various environmental and item details. If Death's Rune was removed at some point connected to, or perhaps even causing, the broader Shattering, this suggests the Shattering wasn't simply Marika's choice to break the Elden Ring into pieces distributed among her children, but might have been connected to, or even necessitated by, this more fundamental alteration to how death itself functions within this cosmology. This reframing suggests a possible alternative reading of the Shattering's causes, rather than the Shattering being primarily about succession or power distribution among Marika's children. It might represent a response to, or consequence of, this alteration to destined death, with the demigod's great runes representing not just portions of royal authority, but perhaps fragments of a broader cosmic order that's been fundamentally altered by death's removal. Each demigod receiving not just power, but a piece of a now incomplete cosmic framework. The various tarnished found throughout the world who seem to exist in states of confusion or madness, particularly those encountered in later game areas closer to locations connected to this Deathrune storyline, might represent individuals who've become aware, on some level, of this altered relationship with death, their endless returns without proper finality, creating a kind of existential confusion or despair that manifests as the madness or hostility the player encounters. Finally, the broader implications of this Deathrune storyline connect to questions about what an ideal or restored Elden Ring might actually require. If destined death's removal represents a fundamental alteration to the cosmic order, any attempt to fix or restore the Elden Ring, whether through traditional Golden Order means, through Ranni's Age of Stars, or through other potential endings, might need to address this death-related alteration specifically, raising questions about whether any of the game's various endings actually accomplish this, or whether they simply represent different ways of continuing to exist within this altered, death-incomplete framework, each ending perhaps offering different accommodations for this fundamental cosmic incompleteness, rather than true restoration of whatever existed before Death's Rune was removed. Chapter 12. Gelmir and the Cult of the Fire Giant Empt. Gelmir represents one of the more hostile volcanic regions in the Lands Between, and its connection to the Fire Giant and the broader Frenzied Flame storyline makes it thematically significant despite its relatively compact size compared to other major regions. This chapter explores the NPCs connected to this region, with particular focus on Patches' recurring presence across multiple locations. Patches represents one of the more unique NPCs in Elden Ring due to his recurring appearances across multiple, seemingly unconnected locations throughout the game. First encountered disguised as a statue near Stormhill, before revealing himself through an ambush attempt on the player, Patches establishes himself immediately as someone whose loyalty, even his basic honesty, can't be relied upon. His ambush, representing a betrayal of the implicit trust players, might extend towards seemingly helpful or neutral NPCs. Despite, or perhaps because of, this initial betrayal, Patches' subsequent appearances throughout the game, eventually becoming available as a merchant within the Round Table Hold, then later appearing again within Volcano Manor's vicinity, suggests someone who's survived through adaptability and opportunism rather than any particular skill at combat or magic. Patches' dialogue throughout these various encounters maintains a consistent tone, self-aware about his own cowardice and opportunism, often commenting on the absurdity of his own survival given his repeated betrayals and schemes. Patches' connection to Miquella specifically involves an optional encounter where he's found preparing to push the player off a cliff. Another attempted betrayal, though this one occurs in a context where Patches himself seems somewhat sheepish about repeating such an obvious tactic. This repeated pattern of betrayal attempts, combined with Patches' evident survival despite these failures, suggests someone who's become almost a constant throughout the Lands Between's chaos. A figure whose specific schemes might fail, but whose overall approach to survival, adapt, scheme, retreat when schemes fail, repeat elsewhere, proves remarkably effective in a world where more conventional approaches to survival, loyalty, combat prowess, faith, often lead to death or worse. The broader implications of Patches' recurring presence suggest something about the nature of survival within the Lands Between's collapsed society. While demigods wage wars, while Tarnished pursue various cosmic agendas, while entire regions become uninhabitable due to rot or other catastrophes, figures like Patches, lacking grand ambitions or strong ideological commitments, simply continue existing, adapting to whatever local conditions present themselves, their lack of investment in any particular outcome perhaps representing a kind of practical wisdom amid so much grand, often catastrophic, ambition displayed by more important figures. The fire giant itself, encountered as a boss at the Forge of the Giants atop the mountaintops of the Giants, connects to Miquella through thematic rather than direct narrative connections. Both locations involve significant fire and volcanic imagery, and the fire giant's role in maintaining or perhaps representing some aspect of the frenzied flame's connection to this world, suggests Miquella might represent a kind of lesser or more localized manifestation of similar fire-related, frenzied flame-adjacent forces, compared to the fire giant's more cosmically significant role. The frenzied flame's origin point, suggested through various environmental and item details to be connected to locations involving significant fire and chaos, including potentially Mount Gelmir itself or locations accessible through it, raises questions about whether the volcanic, hostile nature of Mount Gelmir represents simply geological reality within this world's fiction, or whether this volcanic activity itself might be connected to, perhaps even caused by, proximity to whatever cosmic forces the frenzied flame represents. This potential connection between volcanic activity and frenzied flame proximity would suggest the frenzied flame isn't simply an abstract concept or distant cosmic force, but something that can manifest physically within the world, its presence or influence potentially explaining otherwise purely geological phenomena like volcanic activity through a more cosmologically significant lens. Fire as not just an element, but as a physical manifestation of this particular outer god's influence on the material world. The various hostile NPCs and enemies found throughout Empty Gelmir, including the demi-human and other fire-adapted creatures, suggest a population that's either adapted to, or perhaps been transformed by, this region's intense heat and volcanic activity. If this volcanic activity connects to frenzied flame proximity, as suggested above, these adapted populations might represent beings who've been physically altered through exposure to whatever influence the frenzied flame exerts on this region. Their fire adaptation, representing not just environmental adaptation, but potentially a kind of partial transformation toward whatever the frenzied flame ultimately represents or offers to those fully consumed by it. The smouldering church and its connection to fire-based incantations and the broader fire worship traditions suggested through various NPCs and item descriptions found within Mount Gelmir provide additional context for this region's significance. If fire worship represents a distinct religious tradition within the lands between, one that exists alongside, but separate from, the dominant Golden Order, Gelmir might represent a centre for this alternative tradition, its volcanic nature providing both practical resources, fire-related crafting materials, incantations, and perhaps spiritual significance for practitioners of this tradition. This fire worship tradition's relationship to the broader Frenzied Flame storyline remains somewhat ambiguous. It's unclear whether fire worship as practiced by NPCs within Mount Gelmir represents a tame or controlled version of Frenzied Flame worship. Perhaps practitioners who found ways to benefit from fire-related power without succumbing to the madness typically associated with full Frenzied Flame exposure, or whether it represents something entirely separate, a distinct tradition that happens to share thematic elements, fire, heat, transformation, with the Frenzied Flame without any direct connection. Finally, considering Gelmir's overall position within the broader narrative, geographically separate from major story locations, but connected through Patches' recurring presence and potential thematic connections to the Frenzied Flame and Fire Giant. This region might represent a kind of in-between space, neither fully integrated into the main narrative's major conflicts, nor entirely separate from broader cosmic forces at play throughout the lands between. Its volcanic, hostile nature, combined with the adaptable, opportunistic survival strategies displayed by figures like Patches who pass through it, might suggest Mount Gelmir represents a kind of microcosm for the broader lands between itself. A hostile environment where grand cosmic forces, the Frenzied Flame's potential influence, exist alongside more mundane, practical concerns, survival, adaptation, opportunism, with neither fully dominating the other, but both existing in uneasy coexistence within this volcanic, chaotic space. Chapter 13. The Frenzied Flame Village and its Aftermath. This chapter explores the Frenzied Flame as both a location-specific storyline centered on the village found burning at the start of the game, and as a broader ideological force within the Lands Between's cosmology, examining how this particular outer god's influence manifests through specific NPCs and how it contrasts with the Golden Order's more dominant religious framework. The Frenzied Flame Village, encountered very early in the game, already engulfed in flames, with its population either dead or transformed into hostile, frenzy-afflicted enemies, immediately establishes the Frenzied Flame's destructive potential. The state of this village, burning seemingly without the fire spreading beyond its boundaries in typical ways, suggests something supernatural about this fire, that it's not simply ordinary flame, but rather a manifestation of the Frenzied Flame's influence made physically manifest, consuming this specific location while somehow remaining contained to it. Gaeta, found wandering various locations throughout the early to mid-game before her questline's conclusion, represents one of the more tragic figures connected to this Frenzied Flame storyline, though her connection isn't immediately apparent during early encounters. Hieta's stated goal, finding her sister connected to a Three Fingers location, gradually reveals itself to be connected to the Frenzied Flame specifically, the Three Fingers representing a manifestation point for this particular outer god's influence. Hieta's blindness, similar to Gowry's, might initially seem like simple environmental flavour, but gains additional significance considering her eventual connection to the Frenzied Flame. If the Frenzied Flame's full manifestation involves something visually overwhelming or transformative, perhaps Hieta's blindness represents either a consequence of previous exposure to this force, or perhaps even a kind of protection, an inability to see clearly perhaps shielding her from whatever visual horror or temptation the Frenzied Flame's full presence might otherwise present. Hieta's questline's connection to the Dung Eater, mentioned briefly in earlier discussion of his storyline, becomes more significant when considering both figures' eventual connections to extreme, transformative cosmic forces, the Dung Eater's seedbed curses and his goal of imposing eternal sleep. Pieter's pursuit of the frenzied flame's three fingers location. Both figures, in their own ways, represent individuals drawn toward extreme, transformative cosmic forces as solutions to what they perceive as the Lands Between's fundamental brokenness, though their specific visions for what fixing this brokenness might look like differ significantly. The three fingers themselves, encountered as part of Hyeta's questline's conclusion within a hidden chamber beneath the Round Table Hold area, present a stark visual contrast to the more familiar two fingers encountered as part of the main Maiden Rebirth storyline, where the two fingers, connected to the greater will, present a relatively calm, ritualistic presence. The three fingers chamber, filled with chaotic, writhing, fire-touched imagery, immediately establishes the frenzied flame as something fundamentally different in character from the greater will's more ordered approach to influencing the Lands Between. This contrast between the two fingers and three fingers, between greater will and frenzied flame, suggests these represent two competing outer gods, each seeking influence within the Lands Between through different methods. The greater will through the relatively structured Maiden and Tarnished Rebirth system, the frenzied flame through more chaotic, transformative, individual-focused manifestations like Hyeta's quest, or the broader frenzied flame ending available to players who choose to embrace this path. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending itself, one of multiple possible endings achievable through specific player choices, represents perhaps the most dramatic possible conclusion to the game's narrative, involving the player character becoming a vessel for the frenzied flame's influence, with implications suggesting this choice would result in the frenzied flame spreading far beyond its current contained manifestations, potentially consuming the entirety of the Lands Between, or perhaps even beyond, in flames. This potential ending's connection to Fia's questline, mentioned earlier as one possible path toward this ending, creates an interesting narrative thread, Fia's compassionate intentions, offering peace to those who fear endless return without true death, potentially leading toward this most destructive of possible endings, suggesting that even genuinely compassionate motivations, when connected to sufficiently powerful and poorly understood cosmic forces, can result in outcomes far beyond what those compassionate intentions might have anticipated or desired. The various frenzied flame afflicted enemies encountered throughout the game, not just within the initial village, but scattered in other locations as well, often displaying erratic, aggressive behaviour accompanied by visual fire effects emanating from their bodies, suggests the frenzied flame's influence isn't entirely contained to its official manifestation points, but rather exists as a kind of background possibility throughout the Lands Between. Individuals who, for whatever reason, succumb to this influence, becoming transformed into these frenzied, fire-touched beings, regardless of their previous identity or location. This broader, less contained presence of frenzied flame influence suggests something about the nature of outer gods within this cosmology more generally, that their influence isn't necessarily limited to specific locations or official storylines, but rather represents potential influences that can manifest wherever conditions allow, whether that's specific ritual locations like the Three Fingers Chamber, or seemingly random individuals throughout the world who, through whatever circumstances, become susceptible to this particular outer god's influence. The contrast between the frenzied flame's chaotic, transformative nature and the Golden Order's more structured, hierarchical approach to cosmic order suggests these represent fundamentally different philosophies about what role outer gods should play in relation to the physical world and its inhabitants. The Golden Order, through the Greater Will's influence, maintains relatively stable hierarchies, demigods, tarnished, various religious and political structures, all operating within a framework that, despite the Shattering's chaos, still maintains recognizable structures and continuities. The Frenzied Flame, by contrast, offers something closer to pure transformation or dissolution. Individuals who embrace it, don't gain power within existing structures, but rather become something different entirely. Their previous identities, loyalties, and positions within the lands between social and political structures becoming irrelevant as they're transformed into vessels or extensions of this chaotic outer god's influence. This suggests the frenzied flame represents not an alternative path to power within the existing system, but rather a complete rejection of that system entirely, offering transformation rather than advancement, dissolution of previous identity rather than its enhancement or protection. Finally, considering the broader implications of this frenzied flame storyline for the game's overall themes, its presence suggests that whatever critiques might be levelled against the Golden Order's rigid hierarchies, its treatment of omens, its connection to the broader shattering's devastating consequences, the frenzied flame doesn't represent a clearly better alternative, but rather an equally extreme, arguably more destructive, alternative, cosmic influence. This positions the frenzied flame not as a solution to the Golden Order's problems, but rather as evidence that the lands between's fundamental brokenness, whatever its ultimate cause, has created conditions where multiple extreme, potentially catastrophic cosmic forces compete for influence, with the Golden Order representing just one of several deeply flawed systems vying for dominance within this broken cosmological framework. Chapter 14. Wandering Nobles, Knights, and Solo Questlines. This chapter brings together several NPCs whose storylines, while perhaps smaller in scope compared to some of the major questlines explored in previous chapters, nonetheless offer emotionally resonant glimpses into how individuals navigate the lands between's broken state, each pursuing personal goals that, while not connected to grand cosmic forces or demigod conflicts, illustrate the human-scale consequences of this world's broader collapse. Rogier, found within the Round Table Hold, represents one of the more melancholic NPCs encountered relatively early in the game. Rogier's questline involves investigating the death of a knight named Florisax, and his dialogue throughout reveals someone grappling with physical illness. References to his own deteriorating condition suggest Rogier is dying, even as he pursues this investigation. Rogier's eventual fate, his death occurring at a specific point regardless of player intervention, with his final message to the player providing a key item, represents one of the more quietly tragic moments among the game's smaller questlines. Someone using what remains of his limited time and energy to pursue understanding and to pass on what he's learned, even knowing he won't live to see any larger consequences of this knowledge. Alexander, the Jarberg warrior encountered as an enormous, animated jar with a humanoid warrior spirit inside, presents one of the more visually unique NPCs in the game, but also one of the more straightforwardly endearing. Alexander's dialogue consistently emphasises earnest enthusiasm for combat and self-improvement. His repeated appearances throughout the game, often found stuck in various predicaments requiring the player's assistance to free him, never seem to diminish this enthusiasm, suggesting someone whose positive outlook remains remarkably consistent despite, or perhaps because of, his unusual circumstances. Alexander's eventual fate, his death during an optional encounter against another massive Jar warrior, represents one of several possible noble deaths in battle moments scattered throughout the game's smaller questlines. Alexander dying in the manner he presumably would have wanted, in combat, having lived according to his warrior code throughout his journey. This framing suggests that even amid the broader tragedy and collapse defining much of the lands between's current state, individual figures can still find meaning and even a kind of fulfillment through pursuing personal codes or goals, even if those pursuits ultimately end in death. Kenneth Height, found near the ruins of Limgrave's Castle Morn area, represents a more politically complex questline involving Height's goal of reclaiming his ancestral castle from current Erdtree-aligned forces occupying it. Height's dialogue suggests genuine grievance, his family's displacement from what he considers rightfully theirs. But the broader context surrounding Castle Morn including the tragic story of Edgar and Irina, explored next, complicates any simple framing of Height's cause as straightforwardly just. Edgar and Irina, found at Castle Morn itself, present one of the more emotionally devastating smaller storylines in the game. Irina, found injured, and asking the player to deliver a letter to her father Edgar, who's become consumed by grief and rage following events connected to the broader regional conflict, presumably related to Height's questline, given their shared location. Edgar's current state, having become hostile, attacking those who approach, including, eventually, his own daughter, suggests someone whose grief over presumably losing other family members or his position has transformed him into something unrecognizable, a tragic figure whose love for his remaining daughter becomes twisted into violence he can no longer control or even recognize as wrong. The connection between Edgar and Irina's tragedy and Kenneth Height's broader reclamation questline suggests that Height's cause, however legitimate his underlying grievance about displacement might be, comes with real human costs. Edgar and Irina represent casualties, in different ways, of whatever conflict resulted in Height's family losing Castle Morn and the current occupying forces taking control. This complicates any simple good guy reclaiming what's rightfully theirs framing for Height's questline, suggesting instead that regional conflicts, even relatively small-scale ones compared to demigod-level wars, create genuine tragedy for those caught within them, regardless of which side might have more legitimate claims. Yura, the tarnished hunter encountered at various points throughout early to mid-game locations, represents one of the more grounded, professionally minded NPCs in the game. Yura's stated purpose, hunting other tarnished who've succumbed to madness or who pose threats to others, suggests someone who's found a specific, useful role for himself within the Lens Between's chaos, providing a kind of necessary service, removing dangerous, mad tarnished from the world, that benefits the broader population, even if it's not connected to any grand cosmic agenda. Yura's eventual fate, his death during an encounter with Bloodyfinger Okina, another tarnished hunter turned hostile, if the player doesn't intervene in time, represents another instance of the pattern seen with Alexander, a character dying while pursuing the role or purpose they've defined for themselves, in Yura's case, hunting dangerous tarnished, even when that pursuit ultimately costs him his life. Yura's death, unlike Alexander's more triumphant final battle, occurs through what's essentially an ambush, suggesting even competent, purposeful individuals can fall victim to the Lands Between's pervasive dangers when those dangers come from unexpected directions. In this case, from another tarnished hunter, who's presumably succumbed to the same kind of madness Yura's role involves combating. Nephili Lu, found initially at the Round Table Hold before her questline leads to a confrontation regarding her father Gostok's betrayal during the Stormveil Castle conflict, represents one of the more hopeful character arcs among these smaller questlines. Nephili's journey, confronting her father's betrayal, ultimately choosing to forge her own path rather than being defined by her father's actions, and her eventual position as a leader figure within Stormveil Castle's aftermath, suggests someone capable of moving beyond inherited shame or guilt to find their own purpose and even position of respect, despite their family's compromised history. The contrast between Nephili's arc and several of the other questlines explored in this chapter, Rogia's death from illness, Alexander's death in battle, Edgar and Irina's tragedy, Yura's death through ambush, highlights something important about the range of possible outcomes for individuals navigating the Lens Between's chaos. While many smaller questlines end in death or tragedy, reflecting the broader dangerous, unstable nature of this world, Nephili's arc suggests that positive outcomes, finding purpose, achieving some form of redemption or new beginning, remain possible, even if they're perhaps less common than the more tragic outcomes experienced by other characters. This range of outcomes, from tragic deaths to hopeful new beginnings, among NPCs whose storylines don't connect to grand cosmic forces or demigod-level conflicts, suggests something important about how Elden Ring's narrative operates on multiple scales simultaneously. While the broader plot involves cosmic forces, ancient gods, and demigod conflicts that reshape entire regions, these smaller, more personal storylines remind players that within this broader cosmic drama, countless individual stories continue to unfold, each with their own stakes, their own possible outcomes, success or failure, life or death, hope or tragedy, occurring regardless of how these individual outcomes might or might not connect to the larger cosmic narrative unfolding around them. Finally, considering these wandering nobles and knights collectively, Roger's quiet investigation despite his illness, Alexander's enthusiastic pursuit of combat glory, Height's politically complicated reclamation effort, Edgar and Irina's family tragedy, Yura's dangerous but necessary hunting work, Nephili's journey towards self-defined purpose. What emerges is a picture of the lands between, populated not just by demigods and cosmic forces, but by countless individuals, each navigating this broken world according to their own codes, goals, and circumstances. Their stories collectively suggesting that even in a world fundamentally altered by cosmic scale events, shattering, death's rune removal, competing outer god influences, individual human-scale stories, with all their attendant joys, tragedies, and everything between, continue to matter, continue to unfold, regardless of how these smaller stories might or might not factor into whatever larger resolution the game's various endings might represent. Chapter 15. The Two Fingers, the Greater Will. And Cosmic Forces this chapter steps back from individual NPC storylines to examine the broader cosmological framework suggested throughout Elden Ring's narrative, focusing on the various outer gods, entities like the Greater Will, the Frenzied Flame, and the Formless Mother, that seem to compete for influence within the lands between, using Tarnished and other beings as proxies or vessels for their respective agendas. The Two Fingers, encountered as part of the main Maiden Rebirth questline, represent the most directly accessible manifestation of the Greater Will's influence within the game's narrative. The Two Fingers design, an enormous, multi-fingered hand-like structure, combined with the ritualistic nature of the Maiden Rebirth ceremony performed in their presence, immediately establishes the Greater Will as something operating through ritual, through structured processes. The rebirth ceremony itself representing a kind of contractual or covenant-based relationship between Tarnished and this outer god. This contractual framing, Tarnished received the ability to be reborn upon death in exchange for presumably serving the Greater Will's broader agenda, whatever that agenda might specifically entail beyond the immediate goal of restoring or reshaping the Elden Ring, suggests the Greater Will operates through what might be considered a relatively civilized or at least structured approach to gaining influence within the physical world, offering tangible benefits. Rebirth, in exchange for service, contrasted with the Frenzied Flame's more direct, transformative approach explored in the previous chapter. The Empyreans, beings like Ranni in her original form as Renna, or other figures throughout the world's history who've held this designation, represent individuals specifically connected to the Greater Will's broader plans, seemingly intended to serve as vessels for the next iteration of the Elden Ring, following whatever resolution the Greater Will seeks for the current shattering crisis. Ranni's rejection of this role, explored extensively in earlier chapters, represents a direct rejection of the Greater Will's plans specifically, not just a personal choice independent of broader cosmic implications, but an active subversion of what this particular outer god apparently intends for the lands between's future. The broader implications of Ranni's rejection, and the Age of Stars ending that represents the culmination of her alternative plan, suggest a vision where the Greater Will's influence over the lands between would be significantly diminished, or perhaps severed entirely. The stars in Age of Stars potentially representing influences or forces from beyond the Greater Will's typical domain. Cosmic forces that exist independent of, perhaps even opposed to, the kind of structured, ritual-based influence the Greater Will currently exerts through systems like the Two Fingers and the Maiden Rebirth ceremony. The Formless Mother, referenced through Mohg's storyline and various item descriptions, represents another outer god whose specific nature remains more obscure than either the greater will or frenzied flame, but whose connection to themes of blood, sacrifice, and apparently some form of transformation or empowerment through these blood-related rituals suggests yet another distinct approach to influence within the physical world, one centered on visceral, perhaps violent, transformation through blood rather than the greater will's contractual rebirth system or the frenzied flame's chaotic, fire-based dissolution of identity. Mog's pursuit of becoming a Lord of Blood through his connection to the Formless Mother, combined with his kidnapping of Miquella as part of this pursuit, suggests the Formless Mother's influence might involve not just individual transformation, but specifically the acquisition or consumption of other beings' essences or power as part of this transformation process. If Miquella represents someone whose own nature, connected to compassion and healing given his associations with the Haligtree explored earlier, Mog's intention to use Miquella as part of his Lord of Blood ritual might represent an attempt to forcibly incorporate these qualities, compassion, healing power, into Mog's own transformed state, suggesting the Formless Mother's influence might specifically involve this kind of forced incorporation or consumption of other beings' essential natures. This pattern, outer gods offering transformation or empowerment through different methods, contractual rebirth for the greater will, chaotic dissolution for the frenzied flame, forced incorporation through blood rituals for the Formless Mother, suggests these various cosmic forces might represent different approaches to a similar underlying goal, gaining influence or presence within the physical world through transformed or empowered intermediaries, but with each outer god's specific methodology, reflecting fundamentally different values or priorities regarding how such transformation should occur, and what the resulting transformed beings should become or represent. The Crucible, referenced through various item descriptions, and the design of certain enemies and bosses throughout the game, particularly those associated with primordial beast-like forms, represents what might be an even older cosmic influence than the Greater Will, Frenzied Flame, or Formless Mother, potentially connected to the very origins of life within the lands between, before the current dominant religious and cosmic frameworks established their influence. If the Crucible represents this kind of primordial, foundational cosmic influence, predating current outer god conflicts, its connection to various beast-like, primal forms suggests perhaps a more natural or unmediated relationship between physical beings and cosmic forces, contrasted with the more structured, ritual-based or transformation-focused approaches of the Greater Will, Frenzied Flame, and Formless Mother. This might suggest these later outer gods represent, in some sense, departures from or impositions upon whatever more natural relationship between physical and cosmic existed during whatever era the Crucible represents. The various envoys encountered throughout the game, beings connected to the Greater Will but distinct from the two fingers themselves, including figures like the various fingers found in different locations performing different functions, suggests the Greater Will's influence operates through a kind of hierarchy or network of different functional roles. The two fingers performing the rebirth ceremony, other fingers performing different functions, perhaps surveillance, communication, or other forms of maintaining the Greater Will's presence and influence throughout the lands between. This network-like structure for the Greater Will's influence contrasts with the apparently more singular, location-specific manifestations of the Frenzied Flame, the Three Fingers Chamber representing a specific access point, rather than a network of different functional roles spread throughout the world. This difference might reflect the Greater Will's longer-established presence within the lands between, having had time to develop this more extensive network, contrasted with the Frenzied Flame's perhaps more recent, or perhaps simply more contained, presence, limited to specific manifestation points rather than a broader network. The Crucible Knights, encountered as enemies in various locations, particularly associated with the Erdtree's broader defences, alongside the more familiar Erdtree-aligned soldiers and knights, present an interesting case their names suggesting connection to the Crucible concept discussed above, but their current role, defending Erdtree, connected locations, suggests perhaps an incorporation or co-option of whatever the Crucible originally represented into the current Golden Order's defensive structures. This might suggest the Golden Order, despite its apparent connection primarily to the Greater Will, has also incorporated or absorbed elements connected to this older, perhaps more primordial, Crucible influence. Using beings or knowledge connected to this older cosmic force in service of the current dominant religious and political order. Finally, considering these various outer gods and cosmic forces collectively, the Greater Will's structured, contractual approach, the Frenzied Flame's chaotic, transformative approach, the Formless Mother's blood-based incorporation approach, and the Crucible's apparently older, more primal influence, what emerges is a picture of the lands between as a kind of contested space, multiple cosmic forces, each with different methodologies and apparent goals, all seeking influence or presence within this physical world, using various beings, tarnished, demigods, other transformed entities, as vessels or proxies for their respective agendas. This framing suggests that the shattering, the broader conflict driving much of the game's narrative, might represent not just a political or succession crisis among Marika's children, but potentially a manifestation of these broader cosmic tensions, different demigods or other significant figures perhaps aligning, consciously or unconsciously, with different outer gods' influences, their conflicts reflecting not just personal or political disagreements, but broader cosmic tensions playing out through these physical, individual-scale conflicts. The various endings available to players then might represent not just different resolutions to the immediate shattering crisis, but different outcomes regarding which, if any, of these competing cosmic forces achieves greater influence over the Lands Between's future, with implications extending far beyond the immediate political or social structures of this world into questions about the fundamental cosmic framework within which this world and its inhabitants will continue to exist going forward. Chapter 16. Closing Rankings, the full list reconciled. Having explored all 121 named NPCs across both halves of this video, this final chapter brings together a complete ranking, synthesizing the individual assessments made throughout, while also reflecting on what this complete picture suggests about Elden Ring's approach to character writing and world building more broadly. At the absolute top of this combined ranking, Ranni's questline remains the clear standout, her complete arc, from initial mystery through to the full revelation of her plans and motivations, representing perhaps the most thoroughly developed individual storyline in the game, touching on themes of identity, sacrifice, rejection of predetermined roles, and the cultivation of genuine relationships and loyalty, all while connecting to the broader cosmic framework explored in the previous chapter through her direct opposition to the Greater Will's apparent plans. Following closely, the combination of Fia's questline and its connections to the Deathrune storyline, explored in Chapter 11, creates a thread that, when considered together, offers some of the most thematically rich material in the game, questions about death, mercy, and the consequences of attempting individual solutions to cosmic-scale problems, all converging through Fia's compassionate, but potentially catastrophic path. Mog and his connections to both the Omen persecution narrative and the Formless Mother's broader cosmic significance represents another high-ranking storyline, particularly when considered alongside Miquella's largely unseen but narratively crucial role, the combination suggesting a storyline where persecution, rejection of societal norms, and connection to a distinct outer god all combine to create one of the more cosmically significant individual storylines, despite Mog's relatively limited direct screen time compared to figures like Ranni. Millicent's questline maintains its high ranking from the first half, but gains additional context when considered alongside the broader Haligtree material from Chapter 9. The questline's exploration of bodily autonomy and acceptance becomes even more significant when understood within the context of the Haligtree's apparent reframing of rot, not as curse, but as a different form of sacred identity. suggesting Millicent's choice, accept or attempt to cure her rot affliction, connects to broader questions about whether the Halictree's apparent embrace of rot represents genuine transformation of meaning, or perhaps a kind of resigned acceptance of an otherwise unwanted condition, reframed in more positive terms out of necessity. The combination of Selen's questline with the broader academic schism material from Chapter 10 elevates this storyline's ranking when considered as a complete picture. The primeval current sorcery Selen pursues gaining additional significance when understood alongside the crucible concept discussed in Chapter 15, suggesting Selen's pursuit might connect to attempts to access or understand this older, more primordial cosmic influence, predating current outer god conflicts, her academic rivalry with Azure representing not just a dispute about magical methodology, but potentially a dispute about which cosmic influences, current outer gods versus older crucible-connected forces, sorcery should align itself with or draw power from. Patch's recurring presence, while perhaps not a questline in the traditional sense, ranks surprisingly high when considered across his full set of appearances. His consistent characterization, opportunistic, self-aware, surviving through adaptation rather than power or ideology, provides a kind of through line connecting multiple disparate locations and storylines. His presence in Mount Gelmir, connecting that region to the broader narrative in ways that might otherwise remain isolated, suggesting his character serves an important structural function beyond his individual entertainment value. The combination of Edgar and Irina's tragedy with Kenneth Haight's Reclamation questline, explored in Chapter 14, ranks higher when considered together than either might individually. The combination illustrating how regional conflicts, even smaller scale ones compared to demigod wars, create genuine human tragedy, complicating any simple framing of legitimate grievance versus current occupiers that Haight's questline alone might suggest. Goldmask and Corin's combined storyline maintains significant ranking, but gains additional context when considered alongside the Two Fingers and Greater Will material from Chapter 15. The Golden Order fundamentalist ending these two NPCs' combined efforts make possible representing one specific vision for how the Greater Will's influence might continue, achieved through rigid adherence to doctrine and ritual, contrasted with Ranni's complete rejection of Greater Will influence through the Age of Stars ending. These two endings representing opposite poles regarding how much continuity versus how much fundamental change the lands between's future cosmic framework might involve. Blade's transformation throughout his hunt for Radahn, combined with the broader Halictree material connecting to Melina's battle with Radahn discussed in Chapter 9, creates additional context for understanding Blade's fate. His transformation representing not just individual corruption through proximity to madness, but perhaps a kind of echo or continuation of the broader devastation that battle caused, Blade becoming another casualty, albeit a delayed one, of that catastrophic demigod-level conflict. The Dung Eater's storyline, when considered alongside the broader Deathrune material from Chapter 11, gains additional context, his goal of imposing eternal sleep representing perhaps an attempt to provide, through entirely different and far more disturbing methods than Fear's compassionate approach, a kind of individual scale solution to the same underlying problem, the absence of true final death for Tarnished, that Fear's questline also addresses, suggesting these two seemingly opposed figures, the compassionate Fear and the disturbing Dung Eater, might actually represent different responses to the same fundamental cosmic problem, each offering their own twisted or compassionate version of what true finality might look like for beings denied it by Destined Death's removal from the Elden Ring. Considering this complete ranking and the connections drawn throughout this video between seemingly disparate storylines, individual character arcs connecting to broader cosmic frameworks, smaller questlines illuminating larger themes, recurring characters like Patches providing structural connections across otherwise isolated regions, what emerges is a picture of Elden Ring's narrative as something that rewards exactly this kind of cross-referencing. Individual NPCs and their stories gaining additional significance and depth when considered not in isolation, but as part of a broader, interconnected tapestry where themes of identity, persecution, sacrifice, cosmic influence, and the search for meaning or purpose echo across dozens of individual stories, each illuminating different facets of a shared world, and collectively suggesting that this world's true complexity lies not in any single storyline's depth, however impressive individual storylines like Ranni's might be, but rather in the connections, echoes, and thematic resonances that emerge when these individual stories are considered together, as parts of a larger, deliberately interconnected whole.